All right, welcome everyone back to a AU Core TDG main call. We've got a few things to go through today. Just a quick reminder for everyone about how we use Zoom. So if you can make sure that you have your name and your organization for what you have when you've signed in, and that just makes it easier for us to be tracking through in terms of like agendas and who's saying what. You can raise your hand using Zoom reactions if you have a question, and you can ask a question at any point. You can also pop things in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat, but I can't. I might not always be totally up to date. And if you've got something that's best discussed by the group, it's better if you put your hand up so that we can have that discussed and minuted than just leaving it in the chat. As always, everyone's attendance is recorded. That goes in the minutes. These are publicly available in Confluence. This recording is captured, and the transcript from this goes on YouTube. And all of that is sent round afterwards so that you'll have the opportunity to review the minutes and suggest any feedback. All right, so I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we will gather today, and that we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. The agenda for today is all about looking forwards. Um, we have finished AU Core R2. And so it is all about the next release and what is happening in 2026, um, including some of the other pieces of work that are happening, some of the events that are coming up, and starting to go through that. So in terms of our agenda, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at AU Core. We're getting an update from the AUCDI folks on what's happening there and where we can expect to see some of that come across into what we need to look at. A bit more on AU Core itself. Um, and talking then about, we've got our next face-to-face in Hobart, and that is going to be all about encounter record. And I think there's probably quite a few people on the line who haven't heard that before. It's something that's been discussed in the CDG, and so we're starting to talk about that in the TDG. So that's kind of the start of the conversation there. And then talking about the Connectathon that's coming up. Is there anything else that people would like to add into today's agenda? All right, hearing
Um,
nothing at the moment.
I'm
Sorry, yes?
I'm interested in talking about, but I'm not sure if this is the right venue, our conception of identifier type.
Our conception, as in AU cause,
Ye-
or okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure, quite sure whether it's the right venue. I think you know about this sort of thing I'm interested in pursuing, but I'm not sure whether it's better pursued here. It's probably better pursued in the other working group. So, what would you suggest?
I know it's an active discussion in the firework group. Uh,
So maybe we'll leave it
you're-
for the firework group. Okay, so that's good. Then I
I
won't try
think
to add
if
it to the thing. Fine.
I think if there's some suggested changes to what is considered supported in AU Core, then this would be the right forum because to talk about like what changes should happen in AU Core. Some of the definitional underlying things, I think that is the AU base. Heath, I see you have your hand up. I assume it's on this topic.
It is, and I agree with what you just said. I think if you're looking for vendor feedback, which I think was um, what was suggested in the other group, I think this is actually not a bad place to sort of gather that interest, not necessarily have the full discussion, but direct them off to, I don't know, a Zulip or something.
Okay, so let's put an item on to talk about the fact that this is an issue being discussed, but not to try and come to any conclusions.
All right, let's fit that in and remind me if I don't explicitly state it when we talk about what might be relevant for AU Core R3. I think that would fit nicely into that particular segment.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other suggestions to add into our agenda today? Alrighty, let's get into the first bit, which is usual business. The minutes were sent round for approval of our last call. I'll just go to them now. You should start to see those on the screen. So these were sent round for review. We've got all the attendees here. We've got slides. There's the transcript, the chat log, the recording, some of the decisions that were made, which I think was really just the interim appointment of TDG co-chairs and our usual business. We had a report back from the Connectathon and talked about and basically went through to confirm moving into publication for AU Core R2. So we spent a lot of time going through the automated QA report of the publication branch for AU Core R2. And at the end of that, we accepted that content and said that that could move through into going to the AU firework group for publication approval. So that was basically what happened in our last call. Does anyone need more time to review these before we approve them? All right, not hearing or seeing anything, then I'll ask who is happy to move to approve the minutes of our last call.
I'm happy to move, Landon Riley.
Thanks, Landon. Who's happy to second?
I'll second Michelle Evans.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we've got a mover and a seconder. I'm just going to bring up the electronic poll for approval of the minutes. Okay, I've just launched that. You should see in front of you the electronic poll. You should vote affirmative, negative, abstain. If you can't vote for some reason, pop it in the chat, a +1 of affirmative, negative, or abstain. And if you've dialed in, you can just say your name and then whether it's affirmative, negative, or abstain. All right, we've got 75% of people who have voted. So I'm just going to give it a little bit more. All right, still looking for a couple more people to vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. I'm going to count that down now on 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. I'll share the results, and I get to see the numbers. You only see the percentage. So I'll just check the chat. I don't think anyone has put in the chat. So it is 16 affirmative, 0 negative, 19 abstain. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. I will stop sharing and let's get back to our slides. Okay, other parts of usual business are actions and updates and news. So I just went back and had a look at the minutes of the calls from October. I think we have more actions than that, so we'll have to have a bit more of a look later on. But of all the actions that were identified from the last kind of 4 months of meetings, we've got two that have been done. There was one on me to correct last call slides, and Shelley did that for me, so that's done. Ricardo needed to follow up with the Connected Care team to answer Sanjeev's question, and that's been marked as done. Correct me, Sanjeev or Ricardo, if that isn't the case. And then we've got one on Ruben and Brett to look at resolving the deferred issue around updating licensing, which has been kind of outstanding for a while. Ruben or Brett, are you on the line? Can you give us an update around that one?
I'm here.
Oh,
Um, I think the short answer is that that has not progressed. I think as well there's a fair chance we might push this into the new TSC as something to deal with.
okay.
But there's no progress to report.
All right. I might leave that then with you and Ruben to discuss if that's something that we still should be tracking through in, because it is in, I guess the thing with this one is it was a ballot issue raised by Ruben, so we've had these sitting against the AU Core project. Um, so I guess that is the question of if this is going to be moved to some other group to address, does it still sit with us and or the AU Core backlog? So I might ask you to go back with Ruben and have a discussion and come back to us on whether or not we should still be tracking this in this way.
Yeah, yeah. I think because certainly the group's not going to be the one resolving it. So I think if we can make another committee responsible for it, they can, tell us what we should do.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, okay. In good updates, AU Core 200 was indeed published. So it was published last Wednesday. That is now out and available. It's in its spot. I don't know if comms have come out from HL7AU yet. I don't think they have. I think we got posted an announcement on Zulip, but I don't think I've seen an official email come through. But congratulations, everyone. We did it. It's out. It's available. Let's get on to the other updates. Brett, can you speak to ballot sign up?
Can let me. Sorry, I should have had this information in front of me.
I've got it on the slide you've provided, so that stuff is up, and it should be on screen.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yes, cool. So, yes, that February ballot period. So we're running, sign-ups are running through to the 13th of Feb. We have the two ballots potentially running for AU Patient Summary R1 Working Standard and AU Base R6.1. So there's links there through to the details of the ballot period. That's got all the dates attached to it and other requirements and links to the sign-up sheet. The other thing we have is so basically the ballot will be open through 20th of Feb through to 20th of March. We welcome you to sign up. If there's any issues with the sign up, you can email me directly at brett.esler@hl7.com.au or ballot at hl7.com.au, and that will get through to someone to deal with it. So if there's any issues with signing up, let us know and we'll follow those through and get everyone signed up. But it is closing on the 13th, end of 13th of Feb. So please do get onto that.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Next one, Connectathon. So the tickets are out. Sorry for the grainy slide. There's a QR code that will take you to the Eventbrite where you can get the tickets for the Connectathon. There's also a work group meeting day on Wednesday, the 10th. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this on like planning and what we should be covering on that day for the AU Core meeting. Let me go on to, the next thing. Okay, there's now a call out for nominations for election. So you might see in our last meeting we approved interim for TDG co-chairs, and HL7AU had a webinar last Friday, and they have provided information around the new arrangements and the election process. So there's a call out for nominations for election for a whole bunch of different positions. So there's the new body, the Technical Steering Committee. There's 4 work groups that are looking for co-chairs. There's the Firework Group. There's an AU Core work group, which is new. HL7AU is moving to a different set of structures. Please check out the webinar. It answers some of those questions. And there's also e-requesting and a terminology group. I encourage both the existing AU Core TDG co-chairs and anyone who is interested to put in a submission to be a co-chair and support the work that all the different groups are doing. I've got some links here. They're on the slides. These slides will be on the meeting minutes soon. But if you have any questions, you can just email through to admin@hl7.com.au. And I've also got the link there to the recording and the slides from the webinar. So what this does mean is that technical design groups are not going to continue to operate throughout all of 2026. They are an interim arrangement until work groups have been stood up, which is, well, I guess it's in the process of now. And so talking about some of what is going to have to, how we do our ways of working, we're going to talk about some of that, including some of the things that will definitely stay the same and some of the things that might change. And that's kind of like a moving target at the moment. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about AU Core 2026. So this is kind of how it's looked. That top image is how it's been, where we've had the firework group, and under that have been the two TDGs, and Core has looked after the Core FHIR IG and the patient summary FHIR IG. There is an AU Core work group that will be created, and it will look after the AU Core FHIR IG and the AU Patient Summary FHIR IG. So some of this is going to stay the same, and some of it is going to be a bit different. I think there's some specifics that will be worked through by the work group themselves and certainly by the technical steering committee, which is going to sit over all the work groups now. So like the fire work group and the AU Core work group and the AU e-requesting work group will be siblings, rather than having AU Core and e-requesting report in to the fire work group. That's going to change. So let's have a look in a bit more detail around what are we going to be doing as we continue to work on things like the AU Core project and or the patient summary project. So AU Core as a project and a product stays the same. It's still this specification, that's the intention. It's going to be worked through in an open and collaborative manner in a community group. It's going to be a firework group, sorry, an AU Core work group that is going to be looking after it. I think this is still going to be basically what happens. I'm expecting there still to be some close work with this clinical design group. The exact terms of reference will need to be worked through when that new work group is formed. And there'll still be a relationship into things like AU base. We'll have to see how this works. I expect a lot of it will still stay the same. I think there'll still be regular online calls. I don't know about the cadence. Maybe it'll be fortnightly, maybe it'll be more or less. I think there's still going to be things like connectathons and spark testing events and ballot activities are expected. So all of this is still, I think, going to be how work happens. But again, when the work group is formed, there's going to need to be some, I guess, specific agreements on its particular terms of reference. So there's currently a Confluence page. That's where we do all our work. We put all our proposals in here. All the meeting minutes and everything are there. We've got backlogs. That's where we're going to be doing our work now. When the new work group is stood up, it's possible that they will have a new Confluence space, and some of this content will be either archived or potentially migrated into the new space. that's something that we'll work through, but there will definitely be something in HL7's Confluence that will have similar sort of content to how we've been doing things. Similarly, there's a YouTube mailing list, so all the meetings are recorded. I expect that to happen. Whether the YouTube playlist is just renamed, or if this one is archived and there's a new AU Core Workgroup YouTube playlist happening. But I do expect there still to be YouTube recordings and those to be made available. Uh, Things that will definitely happen. We have a Zulip for every HL7AU specification. So that's about the product, that's about AU Core project and specific. That's still where all the kind of announcements, the updates, you ask questions is going to keep going. All the electronic voting, all of that stuff is still how that's going to work. So that will continue on. The implementation guide itself, absolutely, continue on. That product is going to continue. It will also have its CI build in build.fire.org at this location. That is a permanent kind of location for where the latest draft is at any point in time. So every decision that gets made that had been made through the TDG and will now be made through the work group will be reflected at this location. We'll continue to use Jira, and that's still at the bottom of each of the specifications where you can propose a change, where you can do that for core or base or fire or e-requesting or any of those specifications. That's how you submit potentially a change request. Or I think if you have a comment or a question, that's going to continue to stay the same. And all the meetings will continue and all the events will continue to be advertised on the calendar. So the AU Fire calendar continues to have all of these dates on it. That will stay true, whether it's called the TDG or a work group. What might change are the mailing lists. I think there'll be some further advice from HL7AU about how the mailing lists will work. Right now, when you sign up, you are registering through a Sparked form, which has a relationship into a HL7AU list serve, and all of the invites and calendar invites and electronic votes goes out through a mailing list. And I think there's negotiations going on to understand what changes, if any, will occur. If in the meantime you would like to be removed from a mailing list, you would still contact Sparked through sparked at csiro.au to request removal from a mailing list. We'll provide an update when we get, I think, a clearer picture on some of that particular way of working. So that was some of the operational things that I just wanted to run through pretty quickly. That's the spaces we work in now. Some of those will stay exactly the same. Some of them will change over the coming months as the AU Core work group is formed. Are there any questions on that before I hand over to Kylene and looking forwards around AUCDI? All right. I'll hand over to you, Kylene. Did you want to share your screen?
I can. I wasn't prepared, but I can. Yeah.
It's up to you. There's a few slides.
Yeah, maybe okay, I'll do it just it's easier. Oh, yeah, okay, it's working. Okay. All right, cool. Thanks everyone. Thanks for the invite to come and give a kind of a refresh to 2026 and to kind of update where we are with AUCDI. I do have some introductory slides around AUCDI, CDG, the relationship with the TDG, which I might just go through quickly, but I think most of the people on the call have been on this for a while, on this journey for a while. So as many of you know, this is sort of, and probably have seen this one, this is kind of a diagram to show the relationship of, I guess, AUCDI, the CDG, and the TDG and AU Core, and how our kind of workflows kind of sit alongside each other but feed into each other. And so on the left, we have our Spark CDG, just like you guys currently have the TDG, and we work to understand the clinical requirements. We take into account the state and national requirements and other international standards, bring those together, do a prioritization development process to kind of build out our AUCDI, a portion of which we are designating as core, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then we also build out an AUCDI backlog, and that helps to drive some of the clinical requirements that you guys take in your prioritization and development process to develop AU Core. This is an older slide as well, just trying to show kind of how the data elements or data items kind of flow through, but it also introduces the idea of a clinical focus group, which we started standing up last year, which are a sort of a subgroup of the CDG to give us some artifacts that we can use to help inform and drive some of our requirement gathering. So on the left there, the clinical focus group are picking up some things around the clinical workflows and scenarios. Those drive into AUCDI R2 and have into R3, and all of the stuff from AUCDI, you know, it's going in an iterative way into AU Core. So just quickly, the purpose of the CDG is to drive the development, validation, and implementation of critical healthcare data standards, particularly the Australian Clinical Data for Interoperability, which is AUCDI, ensuring that patient data is clinically meaningful, accurate, accessible, and standardized across the healthcare exchange and reporting. This is our community process going from use case and requirement gathering workshops through to the development of data models, and having that go through a review process, and then being published at the end of the community comment period. If you're after more information, you can find it on the Spark website, but this is just sort of a view to show where the Spark CDG is really working in the middle. The TDG always has opportunity. We always welcome your feedback on the draft models that we're developing in our workshops as we're gathering our use case and requirements, but also when we release for community comment, we're very keen to hear all of your viewpoints on all of these things, just so we make sure that it is fit for purpose, not just from a clinical point of view. The CDG scope really is that driving the development, as I said, really providing clinical input and insight to the AU technical design groups and policy discussions as required. We're validating and defining our data elements and data groups and value sets needed for AUCDI and FHIR IGs based on agreed use cases. They're there also to support the development of testing data for Spark AU, so helping to test persona or profiles from the Spark test data. If there's other like clinical information required, like clinical histories, medications, problems, diagnosis, we always try to reach out and ask for help. And then also assist in developing materials to enable the clinical education and understanding of Spark as well if needed. Outer scope for us is really the FHIR IGs, that's this group here. We're not really looking at administrative workflows, billing information, or technical concepts such as security, access, privacy, and consent. System information or system-derived information, we really rely on the technical implementations for that. User interface or form implementation requirements and broader discussions regarding reforms, implementations, and development not relevant to the Spark program. We do recognize that these topics come up and sometimes the discussions themselves are really good, but you know, it is out of scope, so we often just record them and make sure to pass them on to the relevant areas where we can. And we have been recording these as like hairy questions, things that other people need to think about when they're designing or building things around this. Just currently, we are refreshing our AUCDI design principles. So these are the ones that have been proposed based off a refresh of the original ones that we did when we first started and our November workshop last year. So if you're familiar with them, I think before we had 9, we now have 7, but I've also incorporated some of the WHO wording around integrated health in the middle. I think we've consolidated some of them, and we will be putting this out as a request for comment on our website. Just to see if there's any more feedback. So this took into account all the feedback that we got in November and kind of changed the format slightly where we now have 1 instead of 2, trying to be a bit more clearer with our wording because most of the feedback we received in November was still really quite supportive of these. There just was some word changing and some redundancy that we need to fix. There was also a request for us to be a little bit more specific around something, so I've done that as well. The other thing to note, when we first started, AUCDI was the Australian core data for interoperability, and all of it was considered core. And I know you guys were using that as a little bit of the scope drivers for what you're doing in AU Core. As of R2, we expanded the scope to call it the Australian clinical data for interoperability as we added additional use cases like patient summary, chronic condition management. We were also starting to look at, child health. And because we want AUCDI to make sure that it reflects, across a person's life course, across the health continuum and across the health ecosystem, it made sense for us to open the name out to make it more inclusive. And it really is just a reflection of the maturity of content. But what that meant in terms of core and scoping to core, we now have things tagged as the core use case within AUCDI. Right now, that is anything that was in R1, anything that was in that Australian core data for interoperability release 1 has been tagged as core. And we're now in the process of developing some criteria to decide going forward what additional things how do we include additional things in that tagged core items within AUCDI? So at our November workshop last year, we proposed some criteria. We have updated it since based on the feedback we got, and we are also going to take this out for comment in the next week as well, just to see where people are sitting. The proposed criteria for tagging content in AUCDI as core is one of the following criteria. So systems can support now with minimal effort, supporting a strategic roadmap with an agile iterative process. That was taken from our original guide development principles for AUCDI, but now that AUCDI is no longer just core and is now clinical, we thought it would make sense to move that into here. If AU Core requires it, so if TDG requires it, then it makes sense for us to then mark it as core within AUCDI, or really trying to support that core common data groups that sit across multiple use cases, trying to include that here as supporting multiple CDG recognized use cases, i.e. 3 or more, and across at least 2 identified care domains. The feedback we had on this originally in November was it like 3 or 2 or how many? We didn't really have any consensus there. So I'm just putting it out again for feedback just to see where people fit on that. So watch out. Probably in the next week, we'll have that one released for feedback. If anyone has any, would be keen to hear what you think. Our next step for this, besides finalising the criteria and the design principles, is to also develop processes around how we want to go about doing this as well. And we'll be bringing that to the CDG, and I'm happy to, we'll have it on our website as well if anyone is interested in that. I mentioned earlier the clinical focus groups. These were set up as smaller groups of clinicians and consumers for targeted discussion and input to tease out issues and develop materials for use by the broader Spark clinical design group. They're really there to provide input to help enable discussions for the different clinical use cases, and they are stood up and down as we need depending on our program requirements. So at the moment we have 2 different clinical focus groups. We won't have one focusing on the clinical chronic condition management, and they're really looking at those priorities within Spark. And then we have another one, which is the patient summary and encounter clinical focus group. So they're working on that at the moment. So these groups have been the ones that have been developing out our consumer stories. They also help us to take work from the CDG where we need to do further deep dive, looking at workflow, looking at clinical requirements. But the data requirements around AUCDI really does still sit with the CDG. The CFG is really there to help us drive discussion, to help us build materials to help enable the conversations. And also, we know that like a lot of the outputs that they provide, particularly around the workflow requirements, feed into the TDGs as well. Quickly, AUCDI, we're up to release 3 now. We've been focusing on chronic condition management, encounter record, and a whole bunch of backlog items. So this is kind of where we're at in terms of the scope. We've been working on this over the last 9 months. So we've added a whole bunch of different groups around health assessments, functional ability. We've added a couple of things around child development, and there were some backlog items that were identified by our community as being of high interest. So we have now added those into AUCDI R3. So the scope of AUCDI R3 now looks like this. At a high level, we've updated a bunch and added a whole new lot in there. And I guess at the next level, these are the new things that have been added. So all the things in black have been added as new. The white ones there just for context. So you can see like that functional ability. We've updated some of the implanted device summary stuff in there as well. Some vaping things are new as well. This is just in more detail, so they're obviously in the slide pack if you want more information. And just a note for everyone, AUCDI R3 is now, we're now finalising the content. The last bits of additions are going in probably today, but we are going for draft for public comment. It will be published on Monday the 16th and we'll open it for 4 weeks. In that time, in that release, it will just be the new and updated content only. And we are looking for feedback from everyone and anyone, and you'll be able to find it on our Spark website. Yes, Danielle?
So in terms of, I think, I guess specifically related to the AU Core FHIR IG and AUCDI R3, would it be right in saying the potential expansion of things tagged as like hash core is that an AUCDI R4 thing, or are there some things being proposed in R3?
At this point, because we don't have a process to tag anything additional as hashtag core, I'm unlikely to do that unless I hear very loudly otherwise. So I'm at this point looking only to augment hashtag core in R4.
Okay. If I think I guess we would be keen to understand, like when in whatever release it's coming out, we would be keen to get uh, be engaged and know when that's coming out and what the
Yep,
picture is
yep.
and make sure that we are, I guess, in alignment, know it's coming, can plan for it and include that in the work that we need to do with the accompanying core release.
Yeah, and I think whatever process we end up following, and there'll be likely some CDG involvement in it, we'll make sure that it is included in comms externally so that everyone knows. And also happy to come back here, when there are changes and maybe give regular kind of content updates to the TDG so that they know what to expect and can plan. Happy to do that.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay. Thanks, Danielle.
Does anyone else have any
Yeah, were there
questions
any other
for Carmen?
questions?
All right. I think that's a good segue into the AU Core R3 schedule. So I'll just bring this up on screen. Hopefully I've got the dates right and I haven't got old ones. We'll see. I'll just put that in presentation mode. Am I sharing? Can people see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. All good.
Okay, so we had this question for AU Core R2. It ended up being asked in a face-to-face kind of or a hybrid format, so I think that was a lot easier but I'm gonna put this back to people here. What what we proposed with AU Core R2 was that we would do like a maintenance release, like a yearly update, rather than a massive coordinated tranche of work to align to some, I think, large external project. There were some discussions of whether or not there would need to be relatively significant changes in line with some of the national infrastructure or provider directory things coming along, or whether or not we would be able to kind of just fold in changes as we go. And so we decided with AU Core R2 to target just a maintenance release, and keep that going and do like a yearly update. Um, and if there was need to change that some way through the process, we could come back and talk about an updated time frame depending on how much work we wanted to put into the scope of the next release. And I guess we're back here for AU Core R3 to have a similar sort of discussion. Um, the agency folks, and I know you guys are on the line, so if I'm misrepresenting things or you want to make a statement about it, absolutely please do. As far as I understand, the work that you guys are doing is going great guns, but it's also looking like it can just come in to each particular release of AU Core, and that you're not asking for, I guess, a major kind of alignment and large piece of work to be done very specifically to support any of the national infrastructure or Health Connect. Would that be fair to say, Ricardo?
It is, yep.
So, with that sense and the proposals that have come out of the pitch, and I'll do a quick recap shortly on what a few different people in the community wanted to do, it looks like all of those can just fold into a standard yearly update. So that's what I've kind of put to the group today. Is so far, I think our idea is we can basically just do a yearly update, instead of doing something that might be more of a 15th or an 18-month larger cycle. Is that kind of the expectation everyone had, that we would just do another 12 monthly update? And does that continue to work for everyone, or are there any concerns on the line for people who wanted to raise something that we should talk about now, about having a longer time frame and maybe more of a bigger scope? Michelle?
Um, just wonder, sorry, getting my computer settings right. Just wondering, like, if something comes up as a critical issue within the first 3 or 4 months as such, will you plan to meet and rediscuss things then? If there's something that just pops out of the woodwork, as hadn't we won't wait 12 months for that first meeting if there's an issue.
Absolutely. And in fact, anyone can raise it at any time, whether that's the agency or anyone. Landon, I'll just pick you out of, out of the lineup. Landon, you could put your hand up and go, oh, hang on, there's a thing that I think really has to go in, and we need to talk about doing enough work to address it. So at any point in time, we can raise that. It'll come back to the project call, and we'll make a majority decision on to discuss what is this thing and should we be extending our timeframes and scope. And I think that's what we need to commit to, having that opportunity.
Thank you.
No worries. So if we do a yearly update, it's going to look basically like what we've got on screen. So same time frames. We've just published AU Core R2 in January, so we'd be aiming to publish R3 in January of next year. Which is this one here. So we'll basically have this work up until June, July, to do any development work, any new profiles, get them in and test them, do any examples, any guidance, any new terminology. Anything we want to do is basically done between February and July. And then we go out to ballot in August. It's always a bit of a long kind of overhead between putting it out for ballot, because the ballot is open for like a month. And then we need to resolve all the community feedback. That takes a couple of weeks. And by that point, we're at Christmas shutdown. That's why that takes that long, because of course we don't really meet in December and January. Everyone gets a break. So we start back up at about this time each year, early February, where we start doing the work again. So that's what our 12-month cycle for core would be. And we'd be talking about scoping AU Core R4 again in sort of November, December, because we've already had a meeting where it was a face-to-face one. It was the one in Canberra where we had a bunch of people from the community come and pitch what they wanted to work on and have included in AU Core R3. So we've got a few of those, and people have also approached me outside of this meeting and outside of these meetings, and I'll run through those now. And then we kind of want to put a call out for scope because we can't do everything in 12 months, but I think we can do a lot. So I just want to run through what's on the table. Um, I think the other thing that's worth calling out, so AUCDI R3 gets published here. So this version of AU Core R3 that we're working on, because we go to ballot here, and ballot is basically saying, hey, look, we're done. Please now ballot this as the standard. That's going to be tied to AUCDI R3. So it might not have any additional hashtag core items in it. What that would mean is that then it'd be the next release of AU Core where we could expect to be bringing in the additional content, and that'd give us that lead time with AUCDI R4 being published here, and then we'd have probably a ballot there again to be doing the work on whatever the new hashtag core stuff is. So if that holds true, then that would be where we would expect to see, I guess, some really driven work that is coming out of the CDG group. So that means that our current one, let me just get to our recap. I'll come back to that one. Recap. Okay. Our current one is going to be driven by community interest. We we don't have any new data groups that are hashtag core. So the work we're going to be doing is all based on community submissions, including those from the Digital Health Agency to align to that broader national digital health program and any particular jurisdiction interests, any other kind of like wider work around that. So the pitches, so quick recap, the pitches that were done in Canberra came from a whole bunch of different organisations like Epic and POSWorks, and we had the agency, and there was some CSIRO, and there were also just some community interest. And these were the 7 pitches. So medication dispense, and it came up number 1 as the highest interest, and that was a pitch from Charlotte in POSWorks. There was from Epic, who pitched diagnostic report, and I think there's a little bit more involved there around looking at some of the pathology reporting requirements. There was care plan, which from the agency. There was also the next one around searching, was around, and I think that's a smaller piece of work to do, was around looking to have some guidance and inclusion around things around paging and count and sort there. That's also in our Jira backlog. And then there were some, I guess, things that have fallen down to be less popular around having an AU Core family member history, looking at expanding the set of actors we have, because at the moment it's basically almost a read-only set of capabilities that's been defined of like, I can request for data and get stuff back. This would be point 6, would be looking at tackling all sorts of things with provenance and around actually like new things and update. And then medication administration was also proposed, but that had the least interest on the day. In addition to this set, I've also had people talk to me about AU Core endpoint, and I'll get you to talk to that in a second, Ricardo. We've got a question also now from Richard around identifier types, and there's also been 2 things from the patient summary project that would like to get in around clarifying AU Core's requirements for must support on repeating elements, so anywhere there's like a multiplicity, and to look at having AU Core support the no known medications work that has been agreed in AU patient summary, and also with IPS and in AU base. So having that come through to reflect in AU Core. Then there's also been a question that we'd backlogged last year, further clarifying some of the data types. So we did work on telecom to say here are the parts of a patient's contact that we need to have support for, and here are the other parts we're not going to mark. And someone's come to me recently and said, look, can we do address now, please? And the last one is sitting on our backlog of converting the narrative we have around search requirements into a set of FHIR structures. So they're computationally evaluatable. Hang on, evaluable? You know what I mean. Those are the things that I've also had people come and approach in the last couple of months to see if we can get this work done over the next 6 months. I'll now also open this up to people online. Is there anything you expected to see in this list or that isn't there, or anything that you want to add to it now? This isn't the last call for scope. This will be open for some months as we continue to do work. But is there anything else someone wants to raise now so we can kind of factor in that we might want to look at how we could do it? All right. What? Here's how we're going to progress. So some people have already done parts of this. If there's something you want to get added, and that includes, and so some people have already done these, like there's a JIRA already for medication dispense, and there's JIRAs around the search, sort, and contact. There is raising a change request, and there is getting it on an upcoming agenda. There's a few other bits and pieces depending on what it is to ensure that we can get some things like Zulip posts and interests, making sure we get the right people on the call. We need to organise some information sessions, and I'm going to be reaching out to the people who've put their hand up that they are interested to have some profiles come into AU Core to get that in train pretty soon. And we need to get that in train pretty soon because even though we've got 6 months, that really only translates to about 7 online calls. So really only got 7 calls to agree on any kind of changed requirements or profiles to bring that in. So it's not much. It seems like it's a long time, but it's honestly not much. There's also one face-to-face meeting that we've got planned, and that is the wrong date. Apologies, I think it's March 10th. It's the work group meeting day in the Sydney Connectathon. And there might be some others. Sorry, Brett, is that right?
Definitely the 10th. Yep.
Yep, okay. So it's March 10th.
Yep.
And then we've got a few connectathons, but this is basically the set of meetings that we can get together and agree on any particular design proposals or change requests. So we need to get cracking. Before I throw to you, Richard, to just socialise the topic that you wanted to add in, I do want to say that just because that's the set that's already been raised doesn't mean that we can't include anything else. If you want something to be worked on, or you have a question or a change request, please submit it. Ask for that to be on the agenda. Things can be big or small. They can be little things like you think the cardinality is wrong and it needs to be mandatory instead of optional. Raise a JIRA, ask for it to be on a call, come and speak to your concern. And if it's a larger piece of work, have a think about what you can do and the community that you can pull together, and we'll do a call for like contributors to come together and work on that so that we can get those proposals put to the group in enough time for us to have a considered response. So I think this is the spot, Richard, to talk about identifier types. It's this ZULIP, isn't it?
Found the unmute. Yes, it's that Zulip.
Let me just go back.
The
Yep.
background for that is that we, okay, the identifier data type has the ability to carry a type data element, which can give you information about what sort of identifier it is. What we've done with many of the Australian identifiers is we've made use of that, and we've defined a long list of specific identifier types. And there's things like there's several for different sorts of DVA veteran cards. There's stuff for a local dispense identifier. There's stuff for a national data device identifier. So we've got a whole bunch of these. And as some work I'm doing with the agency, a couple more identifiers, which are defined in the Health Identifiers Act, have come up as being things that people want to include in some agency work. And so it's a case of, new identifiers. What would be their types? And it's a case of looking at this long list of identifier types and thinking, oh, maybe we could put it in that one. The particular one was NOI because the description looked appropriate. And then you find that NOI is constrained in AU Core organization to say that no, NOI is limited to only these sorts of identifiers. And about then, I sort of thought, where do I find documentation to explain all this? And what's the way forward? I couldn't find documentation to explain all this. And one of the things that was put up when I started digging into this was maybe we've got a more complicated system of having a new identifier type for every kind of identifier. Maybe we want to do something different. Or maybe we want to just add a couple of extra identifier types for the two kinds I'm interested in. Or maybe there's some rules where they can fit under some of the existing identifier types. And so that's the sort of issue that I'm floating around at the moment. And so I guess one of the things is, how do we want to use identifier type to help us deal with identifiers that are being exchanged in FHIR resources? And these Zulip stuff is an attempt to collect some information from people about, well, what sorts of use are people making of identifier type? Do they find it valuable? Do they find it important? Do they find it essential? And then that can inform what path forward we make with the types of identifiers for these couple of kinds I'm working with, and working out how to integrate them with Core.
I have a couple of suggestions. I think I was looking at this. I I suggest that what you've articulated is really good. Like it's basically the question of who's using coded identifier type and how. I think the questions that are available for people to respond to are very specific and don't actually do that high level question. So I would suggest that these aren't identifier types, these are profiles actually. Some of the profiles have multiple types, like this one. Each of those three is a type. But okay. I think maybe next steps could even be can either you, Richard, or Brett, could you post the where this is going to be talked about next so that if people can contribute to this discussion, they can come along to the meeting because I think this is going to be talked about in the next firework group, which I think is next Wednesday.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. So can you post that here and maybe on the Zulip as well?
Yep. I found that my thinking about what the issues are has got clearer as this has gone on. So that statement just then is probably clearer than anything I've said previously about the actual issues.
Well, we'll have the transcript so you can steal your statement. I often find that I say something, they go, "Oh, that was good." Um, and I think maybe you could post a simpler question. like maybe even ask people to list their use case or something, because I really feel like this is an incredibly detailed list.
Yeah, yes, that's. I mean, one of the things that does is it demonstrates, I think, quite clearly that we have a lot of identifier profiles, and that they've all make use of one or more identifier types. They're quite a fine-grained sort of thing. And so I guess one of the questions was, is this the way we want to go forward? And maybe we do, but maybe it doesn't belong in a Zulip question, but I think I started collecting the information and thought, yeah, let's pop it here.
Okay. Um, does
I will, yeah, look, I'll put into the Zulip chat information about it. I'll put stuff onto the agenda for next week's meeting, and I'll have links in both places to where there's a usefully condensed set of information about this.
I think we could also pose the question, like, and make sure it's in the agenda for the next AU Core TDG to do some further discussion about like the AU Core use case and who's using this kind of thing and what sort of identifiers. So we could work on an agenda item for the next meeting as well. And we've got two people with their hands up. Sorry that I missed. Um, Heath, I think you're first.
I mean, this is starting to get quite detailed. I just wonder whether a wiki page might be easier to consume rather than it getting, I guess once we start getting comments and things like that, it's going to get a bit lost. The other point is, like from this group perspective, I think the idea was to work out how people are using this identifier type, as in vendors. And I think one of the ways that it may be used is to correlate identifiers that back to database fields for specific identifiers and those sorts of things. The other way might be through querying, so querying by type rather than querying by system. So I guess if I understand correctly, that might have been the kind of implementers' feedback that we were keen to find out on what the implications were if we changed the way that we make do profiles around identifiers without identified types. Hopefully that, solicits a little bit more feedback. Is that aligned with where you're going, Richard?
Yeah, that absolutely fits with it. I mean, for me, it just started off as of what value type should I use, but it's sort of a case of, well, how do we want to use type? And yeah, do we want to continue using type the way we are? And why are we using type the way we do? And what are the guidelines for adding extra identifiers to the pool of Australian supported identifiers?
For me,
Before we
it's
go to
kind of a
Mandy,
legacy thing, and that we may, we seem to be continuing this legacy with every profile that we're creating. And I think that we might be getting ourselves doing more work than we need potentially.
before we go to Mandy, Richard, I think you should also reach out to e-requesting who uses the like I think it the use case coverage is very broad, so I think you should also reach
Indeed.
out to the other work group. Um, Mandy?
Everyone, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I actually see where all of you are coming from. Just to give a notion regarding big data and processing information, like, like an end reverse engineering, there would be issues with clustering if this clustering or rectification doesn't happen. So I'm not saying that you need to take out identifiers. Absolutely, they are valid and reliable, but there should be pathways for clustering so that when you want to analyze information or access information, you're not looking at a bit of a kind of a bowl of mess. It's all clustered and pathwayed. So maybe that would help kind of categorization and clustering. That's all I wanted to say, if that makes sense, what I'm saying to you. Because looking at the big data, looking at data analysis, looking at identifying who's where, having all of them in at one platform would make it a hell of a mess when you backtrack.
On that, one of the things with the identifier resource is the two key elements are system and value. And so, one might say, I'm a SNOMED code, and the next one will be a short string of numbers. And that would be then a SNOMED code. And that's the way that the identifier works. Bad example, I should have. Yep. I'm a Medicare card number would be in system, and then the number would be in the value. Now, when you've got your value for system, you can always determine the value of type. Type is determined by the
No.
is derivable in theory from the system, I think.
Yeah, but there are local systems. It's not, I think you're talking about incredibly well-known national identifiers, in which case, yes. But there's so many more out there for like every hospital's namespace or, those kinds of things that I think that's a hard ask
I hear
to
you
get
all.
that.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm raising this, because to make your life much easier and not coming back and fixing it way down track is to consider, like, I'm not saying that clustering is an option or how we're going to do it, because I'm still learning in this field, but keep an eye on that this might come up as a big pain in the neck later on. That's
That
all.
sounds great, Mandy. You should totally
Thank
join
you.
us next Wednesday, and add into the conversation. It sounds like there's some useful things there. And I think last one, Brett.
Oh yeah, there is a bit of history for identifier type and why it's there in terms of its usefulness in linking it to V2 messaging. And also, but I think the main thing is that is it a useful category to kind of group identifiers by is important as well. So I think the NOI discussion is certainly an interesting one as to giving NOI a very specific meaning. I think it's good we have this discussion broadly, because some of the existing identifier types have actually come from V2 definitions previously, where there's been terms defined for V2 use that have come into the FHIR spec. Yeah.
Where would we document that sort of stuff? Would we put it on a page in AU Base? Would we put it somewhere in an HL7 Australia thing referred to from AU Base? Where
Well,
should
it
that be
was
documented?
in the original change materials. So every meeting minutes where these were discussed and the original change requests.
Yeah,
So that is archived, as far as I understand.
Yeah, but I think too, this is almost we now have a lovely approaches to whatever in approaches to profiling. So if it gets to that point of being to that level of being a consistent approach, we can write it down and say this is how we do it for identifiers. But I think it's good to have the discussion again, because it was discussed more than 5 years ago. The original data type profiles were done, so it'd be good to go through it again.
All right, that sounds good. And I think a lot of the discussion has kind of veered off into what will sit in the firework group space. So I think we've got this seems like it's going to be an ongoing topic, and it may massively change how identifiers work in Australia in fire. So certainly encourage everyone. It would certainly change AU Core. We would need change requests, and it would impact how that's handled. And so I think would definitely like to stay abreast with that on the AU Core content, and have anyone who exchanges identifies have put their opinion in on what we need and what we use. I would hate for us to make some decision and it just proliferate something that breaks kind of, across the Australian ecosystem. So, with that being said, bit of catastrophizing there, why not? Let's go back to our regularly scheduled program. And I think that obviously then this identifiers type content, whether it's just an update that nothing has changed or that they're seeking some substantive normative change, we'll get those updates in upcoming AU Core meetings. I will move on to the next topic unless there's anything else around scope that people wanted to raise. All right, so we're just rounding out now. We're going to finish off really with talking about encounter record, and I'll hand that over to Kylie and Heath, who were talking about the really what is coming up in terms of the broader Lake TDG scope and some pre-work and bringing things into FHIR. Did anyone want to share their screen instead, or do you want me to just continue on and you say to me, next slide?
Just continue.
Okay.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Heath. Yeah, just letting everyone know that, yes, we have another Sparked event coming up in Hobart, 24th to 26th of February. So on the 24th in the evening, there is like a leadership evening, and then on the 25th, and it will be the CDG, including a combined CDG TDG, and the 26th will be the TDG. If you are interested, it is unfortunately all sold out. There is a wait list, and we do have people drop out all the time. So if you are really interested, please get in contact and we'll see what we can do. I think you can register your like wait list. Like if you want to be on the wait list, you can either email us or go directly to Eventbrite. I think there's a wait list functionality there. I think that's all I wanted to. Oh, yeah, that's all probably. I mean, the evening will be the usual sort of networking event. There'll be a plenary. There'll be a chat, I think, from Mark Brunstein, who's one of the visiting professors from the US at CSIRO, talking about the future, and Daniel McCabe will also be talking. And then on the 25th, which is, oh, sorry. Yes, so this is just a little bit more detail around the dates and time of the CDG and the TDG. And I think we can probably skip to the
next
next
slide.
one. This is just a quick look at the agenda, and I probably won't spend too much time on it. But the morning is focused around the GP CCMP, the Chronic Condition Management Plan MVP validation that we'll be doing, and we've been working on that for a little while. But from 11:30, that's the beginning of the joint CDG TDG, where we will be focusing on the encounter record conversation, which Danielle mentioned a bit earlier. And this is something that we've been talking in the CDG for quite a few years now. I mean, it's become this now started out just as reason for encounter, but it's kind of grown into this idea of an encounter record. So we'll be talking about that, recapping it. We'll have some clinicians and consumers having a chat to let us know, what good looks like. We know that currently in My Health Record we have event summary, but these are some of the lessons learned around that. So we'll be talking around the encounter record, what could the scope look like, some example scenarios, and then some of the usability considerations. And then that'll kind of lead into day 2. So passing to Heath for day 2.
Yeah, so as Danielle indicated earlier, this basically workshop, TDG day on the 2nd is more of a TDG, but we're hoping that we will still have some clinician engagement that we do when we have face-to-faces. But this is really just an initial discovery on this new piece of work around encounter record. And so we're looking at making sure that we have an understanding from the CDG work that's been going on with Kylie and the team. What is an encounter record? We're going to have some industry examples or presentations in some of the areas of healthcare delivery that are non-traditional, such as with pharmacies that are perhaps doing a bit more clinical work, things like vaccinations, etc. And then perhaps virtual and urgent care settings and ambulance visits and handovers. So that should be insightful around what the use cases are for this encounter record. Then we're looking at some of the again, industry perspectives of what challenges we've had in the past on doing things similar to this, identifying, the data that's changed, identifying what's relevant, what's current, and the information and the kind of things that need to be recorded as being done next. And then we'll start to work through what might this look like as a project? How does it relate to the work that we've done with patient summary? Is it something similar? And then, start to think about, is it a new implementation guide? Is it just a new profile? Where does it live? And what's the relationship to the existing IGs? So I think I've pretty much covered these objectives. But really comes down to in the end, sort of getting some agreement around how we're going to move forward, with the idea of perhaps getting some support for a new project within the new AU Core working group, perhaps. So we're exploring all of that. It's a different discovery session. So, any questions?
Nothing in the chat, and no one's popped their hand up. There'll
Um,
be. Oh no,
sorry.
please.
Oh, look, I might have missed this in what you were saying, but are a lot of people wanting to exchange encounter information that they're already recording in their systems? Or is this more about filling a gap where people aren't actually exchanging this at the moment because they're unable to do so?
So I guess it's part of the modernization of our data exchange that we're currently doing, but also starting to incorporate to support those new healthcare delivery providers, which are not able to exchange this kind of information at the moment. So basically, as I said, it's a discovery piece, trying to look at, is there a need for such a thing? So your question is exactly what we're going to tease out, Richard.
Thank you.
And Kylie, did you want to provide some comment on that? Because I know it's also been explored in the clinical space.
Yeah, we've been exploring it for a while, right from our first year of Sparked. Reason for Encounter was on the government agenda. I'm really interested in understanding Reason for Encounter, how that information cut can start being exchanged. The more we spoke about it, over a couple of months, even years, it became apparent that it was more than just Reason for Encounter that was important to understand from a clinical point of view, from a government point of view, from a population health point of view. And Reason for Encounter traditionally has been sort of kind of a GP-centric space, but actually it's really useful kind of getting wider and further. In the government demonstrator a project that they did where they kind of demonstrated some consumer use cases and demonstrated a particular patient workflow. They introduced the idea of an encounter record and the value of it that could be used in, for example, when it comes to either urgent care clinics, telehealth, even a paramedic workflow. So how information from that encounter currently is quite siloed. How do we get that flowing so that it can be used further down the chain? So there's definitely a recognized clinical like usefulness of that kind of data. In terms of though, Richard, what you're saying in terms of like currently recorded, I know that event summary is definitely something that can be exchanged now, but like based on the feedback from the clinicians, it's difficult to understand what can and can't be or is everything can go into an event summary? How do we use it? The current way that it's displayed back to them is not particularly easy for them to interact with. So I think it's exploring all of these things and understanding, is this the right approach? And I think, yeah, coming back to Heath, it is like a discovery to understand and make sure that this is appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kylan and Heath. Any other questions around encounter record or what might be done on the day? Out of that day, of course, there will be a report back on like the summary and both from the CDG the joint CDG, TDG, and the TDG activities will come back into this fortnightly call or whatever it's replaced by if the new work group is up then. But there'll definitely be a report back into, I think, say, here's what was uncovered on the day, here's some of the summary things, here's the suggestion from the group on what our next steps are and whether or not we do continue to explore this and it's a new FHIR IG or a new profile or none of the above, or, I don't want to obviously put the horse before the cart because that's what the day is the discovery piece. Um, okay. Any other comments, Heath or Kylin, on what's coming up in Hobart?
Not from me.
All right, so we've got a little bit more time left, so we can actually, I think, finish this one off and go to Brett, because we've got the March work group meeting and the Connectathon coming up. So I'll hand over to you, Brett. Did you want me to keep sharing?
Yeah, you can keep sharing up. I think,
Okay.
yeah, I'll just run through this pretty quick right now, but it'll come up again, I'm sure. So there is a Connectathon event and a work group meeting event. So the first, it's a 3-day event in March, starting on the 10th, and the Connectathon on the 11th and 12th. So we have working group meetings on the 10th, and we have a regular Connectathon on the 11th and 12th. So there's a couple of Zork channels there set up for the Connectathon. That's a place we can communicate around the tracks that we are running. And also you can always contact the co-chairs for work group activities and content for the meetings. So we're seeking to kind of flesh out the agenda for the meetings planned, and also hot topics for breakouts at the Connectathon. So this is very tentative.
Sorry, Brett.
Yeah, go on.
Can I ask, do we have the advice yet in terms of facilities if it's going to be hybrid, or will it be face-to-face only?
I'm chasing that. I have some. Yeah, there was some questions about hybrid. I'm still chasing that because I would really like to be able to do a decent hybrid meeting, but that is not confirmed yet.
Okay,
We'll
thank
have to
you.
let you know. Yep, I don't know for sure.
Sorry, Brett, is that
Yep.
for the actual Connectathon or the working
No,
group day?
for just for the working group day. Yeah, for the working group day. Just so we can hold a meeting and let people dial in to the meeting properly. But that's not yet confirmed, so we'll definitely confirm that one way or another, and that might affect some of the decision making on the day. So we basically have two decent sized rooms for the work group event. So at the moment, the requested 4 slots in one room, so they're planning to run a whole day set of activities, and we've got a tentative plan for the firework group and the AU Core projects. So for this group, we're mainly looking at the AU Core TDG having a regular meeting in Q2. So the agenda for that will have to be worked out exactly what that means. But there'll be some business and discussion topics in that call. We've got the patient summary project in Q3. That'll be probably hot topics and things that we need to discuss around patient summary, and a new profile kind of session for Q4 for AU Core. So that's where we can sort of discuss new work coming and looking at the next version of AU Core.
So I have to wrap up really quickly.
Yeah, that's probably enough on that one. Yeah, so go on.
And in parallel, I guess for people, there'll be 2 rooms running at the same time. One's requesting, one will be the firework group, AU Core, and patient summary.
Yeah, that's certainly
go where
tentative.
you need to.
Yeah, that's tentative anyway, because I'm not sure if there's other things going to happen as well. Just to note, there's the test data project, that there's a deadline there of the 16th of February. So if there's any information, this is essentially the test data that will end up going to the Connectathon to be used for things. So if people have any needs or desires to add anything to that, there's links there, and a deadline on Monday. They're going to try and close that up and get it ready for the Connectathon. So I might go on. So just activities. There's on the AU Core track and patient summary tracks. We are running the 101 stream again. There's a general purpose AU Core stream. We adding a specific focus to look at smart apps usage because the smart apps track definitely has some AU Core usage, but we haven't really tracked that very much. So that's on the cards as well. And we expect also some the HCA provider directory to be implementing AU Core and some more testing around that stuff. We also have notably for the patient summary track, we have the Inferno patient summary testing facilities. That's some enhanced capability with that testing tool with Inferno, so that'll be interesting. We can do some further testing. Breakouts as well. I think we, seeking probably people that have a purpose for a breakout around AU Core and patient summary. We've got to bring that together. We definitely will have a patient summary hub topics, and we're definitely having an IG authoring general thing as well. That's about it.
Thanks,
That's
Brett.
good for now. Yeah.
People suggest topics using Zulip.
Yeah, Zulip is good. So the Connectathon streams are there, but I think for the work group meeting, probably going through the co-chairs is good.
Okay, thanks, Brett. We're basically going to wrap up. Thank you for the speedy wrap up, Brett. I know we didn't get the chance to ask some more things, but look, let's not go over time today. We're just going to wrap up real quick. We're here now. We're basically starting to move into AU Core R3 content. Like I said, people, and I've seen them in the chat, are getting ready. We look like we're going to have endpoint and medication dispense is coming fast. I need you guys to reach out to me so we can schedule information sessions and other things that we need to get that through the AU Core process. Yep, that would be great. So let's get that in train. Our next call, which is in a fortnight, same time, is going to go through AU Core change requests, basically. We're going to have at least the 2 coming from patient summary coming in our next call, and there might be more. So again, reach out to me if you want to put something on here. And I also think, Richard, we might get an update around what's happening with identifier types into the next call. Perfect. Is there anything else people know now that they'd like to add on to the agenda? All right then, reach out to me or any other co-chair if you do want to put something on, and I'll see you in a fortnight. Thanks for your time today, everybody.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, team.